What happens when a seasoned politician known for his relentless investigations and high-volume speeches finally comes face-to-face with a new generation of sharp, unapologetic lawmakers who refuse to back down? That S. Exactly what unfolded when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the fiery freshman Democrat from Texas, went head-to-head with Jim Jordan, one of the most vocal Republican figures in the House Judiciary Committee. The clash wasn't just political theater. It wasn't just about party lines. What happened? Live. Exposed something deeper. A shocking legal vulnerability hiding in plain sight. And here, S the kicker. This isn't just about two lawmakers trading blows. This is about what kind of accountability we demand in America, and how one unexpected voice can flip the entire conversation on its head. Picture this. You're at work, sitting in a heated meeting. There's always that one colleague, loud, aggressive, interrupting everyone, throwing accusations around like confetti. For years, no one has challenged him because, well, he's been around longer, he knows the system, and he talks the loudest. But then a new co-worker walks in. She's sharp. She is prepared. She is not afraid to call him out, point by point, with receipts in hand. Suddenly the room gets quiet. Suddenly the power dynamic shifts. That is exactly what millions of Americans witnessed in real time when Crockett turned the tables on Jordan. Now, why should you care? Because this wasn't just a gotcha moment. This was a turning point in how oversight, legal exposure, and accountability are handled in Congress. The conversation has rippled far beyond Washington, forcing Americans to ask, what does real accountability look like? Who actually has the courage to stand up, even when the odds are stacked against them? And most importantly, what are the hidden legal risks that powerful figures like Jim Jordan might be running from? By the end of this video, ULs. See why Crockett's fiery exchange wasn't just good TV. It was a warning sign of deeper cracks in the foundation of political power. Cracks that could have major consequences for the future of American democracy. And here's the open loop for you. In just a few minutes, I'll reveal the golden nugget. The one detail about this showdown that almost everyone missed, but that could signal a dramatic shift in legal accountability for top lawmakers. Trust me, you'll want to hear it. So buckle up, because we're about to break down how Jasmine Crockett destroyed Jim Jordan live, what legal exposure it revealed, and why this moment might change the game for American politics as we know it. When we talk about politics in America, let's be honest, most of the time it feels like a broken record. The same arguments, the same talking points, the same back and forth that leaves the American people wondering if anything ever really changes. But every now and then, a moment breaks through that noise. A moment so sharp, so unexpected that it forces people to stop scrolling, turn up the volume and pay attention. That is what happened when Jasmine Crockett, a freshman Democrat from Texas, went head-to-head with Jim Jordan, the Republican firebrand from Ohio. Why does this matter? Because this wasn't just another shouting match. It was a clash of old-school power politics versus a new wave of unapologetic accountability. It was also a rare glimpse into something most politicians avoid talking about: legal exposure. Now, before we dive into the play-by-play, let us pause for a second and connect the dots. If you're rewatching this at home in the US here, S, why this showdown should matter to you. It's about your voice. When lawmakers argue in Congress, they are not just fighting each other. They are shaping the policies, investigations, and oversight that impact your life. Healthcare, jobs, education, civil rights, it's all connected. It's about accountability. For too long, many Americans have felt like powerful politicians, especially those who shout the loudest, get away with things ordinary people never could. When Crockett pressed Jordan, she wasn't just debating, she was highlighting the cracks in a system that is supposed to hold everyone accountable. It's about generational change. Jim Jordan has been around Washington for decades. He's built a brand on being combative, dominating hearings and leading high-profile investigations. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, represents a younger, more diverse and more fearless generation of leaders who aren't willing to sit back quietly. Their clash symbolizes something bigger, the old guard being challenged by fresh voices. So what are we covering today, and why should you stick around until the end? Here's the roadmap. Problem identification. We'll start by breaking down the first major problem, the misconception that being loud and aggressive equals being right. We'll look at how Jordan's S style has dominated in the past and why Crockett's S refusal to be steamrolled changed the equation. Myth-breaking next. We'll bust one of the biggest myths in Washington, that political theater has no real consequences. Spoiler alert, it does. We'll talk about how these clashes actually expose vulnerabilities, especially when it comes to legal accountability. Solution 1. Then we'll talk solutions. Specifically how everyday Americans can demand better accountability, not just in Congress, but in their own workplaces, schools, and communities. We'll make this practical, relatable, and something you can act on. Solution 2. We'll go deeper with a powerful case study, how moments like this can shift power dynamics, inspire others to speak up, and force long-standing figures to face scrutiny. We'll even share a surprising fact that most people overlook about what happens when politicians are cornered legally. The golden nugget. And finally, the part you don't want to miss. The golden nugget. This is the detail hidden in plain sight during the Crockett versus Jordan clash that reveals more than just political theater. It signals a real legal risk that could have long-term consequences. Now, why structure it this way? Because this isn't just about replaying a viral clip. This is about peeling back the layers and asking the bigger questions. What does it take to hold powerful people accountable? Why do some lawmakers dodge responsibility while others put it all on the line? And most importantly, what lessons can ordinary Americans take from this moment into their own lives? Let's be real. Politics can feel far away from daily life, but accountability, that is something you deal with every single day, whether it's at work, when your boss takes credit for your idea in school, when group projects leave one person doing all the heavy lifting, or even at home, when responsibilities aren't shared equally. The fight for fairness is universal. That's why Crockett's clash with Jordan hit so hard. Because deep down, every American has been in that room faced with someone louder, older and more established, wondering if it's even worth speaking up. Crockett showed what happens when someone not only speaks up, but backs it up with facts, confidence, and legal clarity. By the end of this breakdown, you'll see that this wasn't just a heated exchange. It was a blueprint for how to challenge unchecked power, how to spot legal vulnerabilities when they are hiding in plain sight, and how to demand a higher standard of accountability both in Washington and in your own life. So stay tuned, because what happened in that hearing room could shape the future of oversight in America. And once we reveal the golden nugget, you will understand why Jasmine Crockett's moment wasn't just a win in the room. It could be a turning point for accountability nationwide. Every powerful moment in politics starts with a problem, and in this case, the problem wasn't hidden. It was right there in the middle of the hearing on full display, the misconcept. And that being loud, aggressive, and dominating equals being right. For years, Congressman Jim Jordan has built his brand around this very style. His strategy is straightforward. Interrupt, push harder. Speak over opponents and repeat key talking points until they sound like truth. In fact, many Americans watching hearings involving Jordan might describe him as the bulldog of the Republican Party, relentless, combative, and ready to go 10 rounds without backing down. But here's the problem: volume doesn't equal validity. And this is where Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's response shifted the ground. The loudest voice in the room. Trap. Think about it. How many times have you been in a meeting, a classroom, or even a family gathering where the loudest person dominated the conversation? They might not have had the best idea, the most facts, or even the right perspective, but because they were louder, more forceful, or more aggressive, everyone else gave way. That's exactly the trap Jordan has leaned on throughout his political career, and it works until it doesn't. Crockett didn't just counter Jordan's arguments. She exposed the flaw in his style. When you peel back the volume, the substance doesn't hold up. Relatable story for Americans. Let's make this personal. Imagine you are at work. There is a team project on the line. One colleague, let us call him Jim, keeps cutting people off. He insists his plan is the best. He raises his voice. He speaks fast, throws in a few big words, and makes it seem like he has it all figured out. The rest of the team hesitates to challenge him. After all, he's been at the company for years. He's close with management. He knows how to play the room, but then a new hire, sharp and prepared, raises her hand. She calmly lays out why Jim's plan doesn't add up. She points to the company guidelines. She references actual data, and she does it without flinching, even when he tries to talk over her. Suddenly the room shifts. People realize maybe Jim isn't the all-knowing force he claims to be. Maybe he's just loud. That's what Crockett did. And the fact that millions of Americans related to it is proof of how common this dynamic is in everyday life. Viewer engagement question. So here's my question for you watching right now. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to win an argument just by being louder? How did you respond? Did you speak up? Or did you let it slide? Drop your answer in the comments, because trust me, you are not alone. Pattern. Break. The shocking fact. Here S, where it gets even more interesting. A study from the University of California found that in group settings, people are 40% more likely to believe someone who speaks with more volume and confidence, even if that person is completely wrong. Think about that. Almost half the time, Americans mistake loudness for leadership. And in Congress, where hearings are televised, that effect is amplified for millions of viewers. But Crockett flipped that script. Instead of shrinking under Jordan's interruptions, she leaned in with facts. Instead of letting him control the tempo, she matched his energy with substance. That is not just good debating. That is a direct challenge to a system built on intimidation. The deeper problem: accountability avoidance. Here's the second layer of the problem. Jordan's style doesn't just dominate the room. It also helps him avoid accountability. When you're constantly interrupting, raising your voice, and flooding the air with accusations, you don't have to answer tough questions. You don't have to provide evidence. You don't have to sit in the hot seat. You create chaos, and in chaos, accountability slips through the cracks. Crockett spotted this, and she zeroed in. By forcing Jordan to face specifics, she highlighted what millions of Americans feel: daily powerful figures often dodge responsibility simply by being louder, faster, and harder to interrupt. Why this matters for the US audience. Now let us step back. Why should an everyday American worker, nang 2 jobs, paying bills, taking kids to school, care about how Jim Jordan runs a hearing? Because it reflects a bigger problem in our culture. We often reward performance over accountability. At work, the smooth talker sometimes gets promoted over the quiet, hard worker. In schools, students who raise their voices get noticed more than those who carefully think things through. In politics, the headline grabber gets the spotlight, while the policy expert gets buried in footnotes. That imbalance doesn't just create unfairness. It creates real risks, because when we mistake volume for truth, the people who need to be held accountable slip through the cracks, and that's where the legal exposure piece comes in. Crockett wasn't just debating Jordan for the sake of debate. She was pulling back the curtain on how his style avoids real scrutiny. Scrutiny that could expose legal and ethical vulnerabilities. Pattern break. Quick story. Let's lighten this up for a second. Picture this. You're at a family barbecue. Uncle Jim, we all have one, is holding court by the grill. He's telling everyone how to flip burgers, how to season the chicken, how he once cooked a steak. So perfect, it belonged in a Michelin star restaurant. He loud, he confident, and nobody dares question him until your cousin Jasmine walks up, points to the grill and says, "Uncle Jim, you forgot to turn the propane on?" Boom. Suddenly, the so-called expert is exposed. That's exactly how Jordan looked in that hearing room when Crockett calmly laid out the facts. Closing this section: problem identified. So here's the problem. Crystal clear. For too long, lawmakers like Jim Jordan have relied on volume, intimidation, and performance to dominate hearings and avoid accountability. But as Crockett showed, that approach doesn't hold up when someone refuses to back down, insists on facts, and demands clarity. This is more than a political clash. It's a reminder for every American. Don't confuse loudness with leadership. Because the moment we stop rewarding noise and start demanding substance, accountability becomes possible not just in Washington, but in every seat. Honor of our lives. Every great story has a myth, something people believe to be true, even though the evidence says otherwise. And in Washington, one of the biggest myths is this: political theater is just entertainment. It doesn't have real consequences. It's a belief many Americans share. After all, how many times have we seen fiery hearings go viral online, only to fade away without any visible change? Clips get millions of views. Late-night shows run their jokes, pundits argue for a week, and then nothing. But here's the truth. Political theater isn't just entertainment. It shapes narratives, influences public opinion, and even exposes real legal vulnerabilities for those in the hot seat. And that's exactly what Jasmine Crockett did when she stood up to Jim Jordan. The myth of no consequences. Why do people believe political theater has no consequences? Because from the outside, Congress often looks like a stage play. Lawmakers yell, they grandstand, they throw around legal jargon, and then they go back to business as usual. But here's the twist. While it may look like empty drama, these moments are recorded, archived and dissected by lawyers, journalists, watchdog groups, and yes, even prosecutors. What looks like a viral moment today can become tomorrow. Evidence, tomorrow. Headline, or tomorrow. Leverage in a negotiation. Crockett sharp questioning of Jordan wasn't just about scoring points. It was about putting his contradictions on record in a setting where legal exposure is impossible to ignore. Relatable American example. Let us bring this home. Imagine you in a workplace meeting where someone keeps insisting they followed all the company policies. They act confident. They dismiss criticism, and they try to paint themselves as the hero. But then a colleague calmly asks a question that exposes a flaw. Suddenly that person's bold claims are in writing in the minutes of the meeting. They can deny it. Later. It's right there on paper. That's the difference between casual drama and documented accountability. And in Congress, every word said in a hearing is part of the official record. That record doesn't go away. Engagement question. So let me ask you, have you ever seen someone act untouchable at work, school, or even in your family, and then suddenly get caught because their words came back to haunt them? Share your story in the comments. Because that is exactly how political theater stops being theater and starts being consequence. Pattern break, a shocking stat. Here is something most Americans don't realize. According to a Pew Research Center study, nearly 60% of Americans say they form their opinions about politicians based on hearings, sound bites, or viral clips, not long policy papers or obscure reports. Think about that. More than half of the country is shaping their perception of leaders based on the very moments people dismiss as just theater. That means Crockett's exchange with Jordan wasn't just entertainment. It directly shaped how millions view his credibility and accountability. Busting the myth in action. Let us look at the chain reaction, the live moment. Crockett challenges Jordan, refuses to be steamrolled, and makes her points with clarity. The viral spread clips of the exchange circulate across social media, reaching millions who never would have watched the full hearing. The public perception shift. Viewers begin questioning Jordan's tactics, wondering if his aggressive style hides real vulnerabilities. The legal angle. Journalists and watchdog groups flag specific contradictions and statements from Jordan, highlighting where legal exposure may exist. The long-term consequence. Public trust, legal narratives, and even future investigations are influenced by the hearing record. That's not just theater, that's cause and effect. Storytelling. A case study. Let me share a quick story to illustrate how this plays out in real life. Years ago, during a high-profile congressional hearing, tobacco executives famously swore under oath that they did not believe nicotine was addictive. At the time, many dismissed it as political theater, CEOs dodging accountability in front of cameras. But guess what? Those very statements came back later in lawsuits, investigations, and public campaigns. They became a turning point in the fight to hold big tobacco accountable. Now think about that in the context of Jim Jordan. What he says or avoids saying in hearings doesn't just vanish. It becomes part of a record that can resurface when legal or ethical accountability comes knocking teaser for what is next. And here, where things get even more interesting. Crockett didn't he just push back against Jordan style? She cracked open the door to real legal exposure, because when someone avoids accountability by being loud, their contradictions start piling up. And when those contradictions are on the record, they can be used later in investigations or oversight. In the next section, we're going to talk about Solution 1. How ordinary Americans can learn from this moment, apply it to their own lives, and demand accountability, not just from politicians, but from anyone trying to dodge responsibility. And trust me, you'll want to hear it. Because it's not just about politics. It is about leveling the playing field, wherever power imbalances exist. Closing the myth. So let's close the loop on this myth. Political theater is not just entertainment. It's a stage where accountability is tested, where words are put on record, and where legal exposure is often revealed. When Crockett stood up to Jordan, she wasn't just sparring for a viral clip. She was dismantling the myth that hearings matter, showing America that even the loudest voices can hide from the weight of the record. And that lesson matters for everyone, because whether you are in Congress or in your own community, accountability starts when people stop mistaking performance for protection. By now, we've uncovered the problem: the loudest voice in the room often drowns out real accountability. We've also busted the myth. Political theater isn't meaningless. It leaves a record, shapes public opinion, and can expose real legal risks. So what's the first solution? The power of prepared accountability. If Jasmine Crockett showed us anything in her clash with Jim Jordan, it is that being prepared with facts, clarity, and calm focus is the antidote to noise. What does prepared accountability mean? Prepared accountability means you don't just react emotionally when someone comes at you with volume or intimidation. Instead, you anchor yourself in truth, in documented facts, and in a mindset that doesn't let noise shake your ground. Crockett didn't raise her voice to match Jordan. She didn't spiral into his rhythm. She came in with focus. She brought specifics. She put accountability above theatrics. That's the model, and it's something every American can use in their own lives. Applying it to work. Picture this: you are in a meeting, and a co-worker tries to take credit for an idea you actually developed. They speak louder, they speak first, and suddenly it feels like the room is leaning their way. How do you respond? Prepared accountability means you don't get flustered. You calmly point to the project notes, the email trail, or the data that shows where the idea came from. Instead of shouting over them, you anchor yourself in proof. And here's the kicker. People remember calm confidence more than chaotic noise. That's why Crockett's moment went viral, not because she screamed, but because she held her ground with precision. Applying it to school. Now let's shift the scene to the classroom. You're in a debate or maybe a group project. One student dominates, insisting their way is best. They sound convincing, but deep down you know the facts are shaky. Prepared accountability means you don't just argue back emotionally. You do your homework, you cite sources, you point to the rubric or the teacher's guidelines. Suddenly the dominance of volume fades and substance takes center stage. That is exactly how Crockett dismantled Jordan, not by out-yelling him, but by out-preparing him, applying it to money and relationships. Prepared accountability isn't just for work or school. Think about money. Maybe you've had a disagreement with a landlord, a bank, or even a family member about shared finances. The other person insists they rewrite loudly. But if you come with receipts, statements, and documentation, the noise doesn't matter. Facts win, or in relationships. Maybe you've had a partner, sibling, or friend try to twist a story in their favor. They say, "You always do this," or "You never said that." Prepared accountability means you can calmly say, "Actually, here's what happened, and here's how I felt at the time." That steadiness diffuses noise. Engagement. Question. Let me ask you, have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to overwhelm you with volume, but you won because you stayed calm and stuck to the facts? How did it feel afterward? Drop your story in the comments. because your experience might inspire someone else to find their calm in the middle of noise. Pattern break, surprising fact. Here is something most people don't know. Studies from Harvard Business Review show that in negotiations, the person who speaks less and listens more is statistically more likely to come out ahead. Why? Because listening and preparing allow you to respond strategically, while loud talkers often trip themselves up. That is exactly what Crockett demonstrated while Jordan was loud and combative. She was deliberate and prepared, and that made her words land harder. The psychological angle. Let's talk psychology for a moment. When people get loud, our natural instinct is either to fight back with equal intensity or to shut down completely. That is called the fight or flight response. But prepared accountability is the third option. Stay steady. It short-circuits the bully dynamic. It shows the room and even the aggressor that noise doesn't equal dominance. In fact, psychologists say that calm, fact-based responses trigger something called cognitive dissonance in aggressive people. They realize their performance isn't at landing, and suddenly they were on defense. That's exactly the shift Crockett caused in that hearing room. A story to illustrate. Let me tell you about a case study from the business world. A young woman working in finance noticed that during client presentations, her older male colleague often cut her off, dismissing her points and steering the conversation back to his talking points. At first, she tried matching his energy, but it just looked like a shouting match. The clients left confused, so she switched strategies. She came in with organized data sheets, case studies, and a presentation that laid everything out clearly. When her colleague tried to interrupt, she didn't flinch. She calmly redirected the room back to the data. Over time, clients started looking to her for the real answers. Her calm, fact-driven approach exposed his noise as hollow, and eventually she was promoted over him. Sound familiar? That's Jasmine Crockett's playbook, Why This Matters Nationally. Now let us zoom back to the bigger picture. Why does this solution matter for America? Because if we want a healthier democracy, we can't reward noise. We have to reward preparedness, substance, and accountability. Crockett's approach gives us a model. Don't get drowned out by volume. Anchor yourself in facts. Keep calm under fire. Put accountability above performance. If more lawmakers and more Americans embraced this mindset, our institutions would look very different. Oversight wouldn't be about who shouts louder. It would be about who comes with facts, proof, and clarity. Teasing what S next. But here S, where it gets even more powerful. Prepared accountability is just the first step, because sometimes no matter how prepared you are, noise still dominates that AS. When you need solution 2, a strategy rooted not just in preparation, but in storytelling and emotion that connects with people on a deeper level. And in the next section, we are going to explore exactly that. How Crockett is sharp, emoty. Ionel Edge turned her exchange with Jordan into more than just a fact check. It became a story. People felt a story that exposed deeper risks for Jordan than anyone realized. Closing this solution. So let's wrap up. Solution 1. Prepared accountability is your shield. It's how you keep your ground when someone tries to overwhelm you with noise. It worked for Jasmine Crockett in Congress, and it can work for you at work, in school, in relationships, and even in everyday debates, because in the end the loudest voice isn't the one that wins, it's the most prepared. So far we've uncovered one powerful solution. Prepared accountability. It's the shield that keeps you grounded when someone tries to drown you out with noise. But here's the thing, sometimes preparation alone isn't enough. Facts matter. Yes, but humans aren't robots. We don't just process logic. We respond to emotion, storytelling, and authenticity. That is where Jasmine Crockett showed us a second solution. The power of emotional storytelling and accountability. What does this mean? Think about Crockett's exchange with Jim Jordan. It wasn't just that she came prepared with facts. It was that she infused her words with emotion, with urgency, with a story that connected to ordinary Americans watching at home. She didn't talk like a stiff politician. She talked like someone who understood the stakes, someone who could cut through jargon and speak directly to what accountability means for real people. That combination of facts plus emotional resonance is what made her takedown so effective. and it's something we can all learn from. Storytelling, example the family dinner table. Let us break this down with a relatable scenario. Imagine you are at the family dinner table. A heated argument breaks out. Maybe it's about money, maybe about politics, maybe about who forgot to clean the garage. One relative insists they rewrite. They bring up facts and data, but it just fee. Else cold, nobody connects with it. Then another relative steps in. They don't just throw facts around, they share a story. Remember last year when we agreed on this? Remember how it felt when we worked together? Suddenly the room changes. People lean in. They're not just hearing information, they are feeling it. That's exactly what Crockett did. She didn't just fact-check Jordan. She told a story that exposed the stakes of his behavior. Engagement question. Let me ask you, do you find yourself remembering raw statistics, or do you remember the stories behind them? Drop your answer in the comments, because chances are it is the stories that stick. Pattern break. The surprising fact here. It's a surprising statistic. According to research from Stanford University, stories are 22 times more memorable than facts alone. Think about that. 22 times more likely to stick in people's minds. That is why Crockett's moment didn't fade into the noise of countless hearings. She didn't just rely on numbers. She built a narrative, one that Americans watching at home could relate to, even if they'd never heard of Jim Jordan before. The hack. Anchor the emotion. So how do you apply this in your own life? Here. As the hack, anchor facts in emotion at work. Instead of saying this plan saves 20%, say this plan saves 20%. And that means we don't have to lay off 3 people. At school, instead of saying this source proves my point, say this source proves my point, and it matters because it affects how future students like us will be graded in relationships. Instead of saying, you forgot to help, say, you forgot to help. And that left me feeling overwhelmed and alone. See the difference? The fact is still there. But now it's tied to a story or an emotion that makes it resonate. That Crockett as second solution in action. Case study. A community example. Let's take this out of politics entirely for a second. In a small town, a group of parents was fighting for safer crosswalks near a local school city. Officials kept brushing them off, saying the budget was tight. Parents showed data accident. Rates, traffic counts, injury reports. Nothing changed. Then one parent stood up at a city meeting and told a story. Last month, I walked my daughter across that crosswalk and a car nearly hit us. I looked into her eyes and I thought, what if next time I'm not quick enough? Silence filled the room. Within weeks, the city approved funding for new safety measures. Why? Because a story cuts deeper than numbers. That's the strategy. Crockett tapped into not just speaking to the committee, but speaking to the audience at home in a way they could feel why this matters nationally. Let us zoom back to Washington. Why does this solution matter for America? Because if politics is only about numbers, most people tune out. But when lawmakers bring humanity into the room, suddenly it matters to everyone. That's why Crockett. As voice cut through the noise. She wasn't just fact-checking Jordan for the sake of the record. She was telling a broader story about accountability, fairness, and what kind of leadership America deserves. Pattern break, a personal angle. Here as a fun twist. If you think about it, some of the best communicators in American history, from Martin Luther King Jr. to Ronald Reagan, weren't remembered for their spreadsheets of data. They were remembered for stories. I have a dream. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Simple, emotional, memorable. That's the same technique Crockett tapped into when she spoke with passion, instead of drowning in technicalities. Teaser for the golden nugget. And here's the exciting part when you combine prepared accountability, solution 1, with emotional storytelling. Solution 2. Something incredible happens. You don't just win the moment. You expose the vulnerabilities that others are trying to hide. And in Crockett's case, that meant exposing the shocking legal risks Jim Jordan was running from in plain sight. That is the golden nugget, the ultimate insight we'll reveal in the next section. Trust me. You'll want to hear it because it shows just how high the stakes really are. Closing. This solution. So let's lock in. Solution 2. Anchor facts in emotion. Tell stories that connect. Don't just present data. Make people feel the stakes. It worked for Jasmine Crockett when she dismantled Jim Jordan in front of millions. And it can work for you when you need to hold someone accountable in your own life, whether it's in the boardroom, the classroom, or even the living room. Because at the end of the day, the facts get attention, but the story makes people remember. We've talked about the problems. We've busted the myths. We've unpacked 2 solutions you can use in your own life. But now it's time for the golden nugget. The detail almost everyone missed in the clash between Jasmine Crockett and Jim Jordan. The moment wasn't just about politics. It was about legal exposure, the hidden risk here. As what most viewers didn't realize in the heat of the exchange, every single word Jim Jordan said, every denial, every attempt to dodge accountability, it all went on the official congressional record. That record isn't just a transcript, it's a legal document. It can be used in oversight investigations, in lawsuits, and even in criminal inquiries. So while Jordan may have thought he was just putting on a performance, Crockett's sharp pushback cornered him into making statements that could come back later. That is, the golden nugget political theater doubles as legal testimony, and Crockett knew it. She wasn't just sparring. She was preserving the truth in a way that can't be erased. Why it matters. For Americans watching at home, this changes everything. Because it means these moments aren't just about who won the debate or who went viral. They were about accountability being locked into the record. If a powerful figure dodges questions, it's documented. If they contradict themselves, it is documented. If they downplay legal risks, it is documented. That documentation can and often does resurface when accountability comes. As knocking emotional punch. Think about that for a second. For years, many Americans have felt like the powerful live by a different set of rules, that there's one standard for ordinary people who face consequences at work, in court, in their communities, and another for politicians who dodge and spin without consequence. But Crockett's moment revealed the cracks. She showed that even the loudest voices can't escape the truth once it's on the record. That's not just a win for her. That's a win for accountability itself. A relatable analogy. Imagine you are in a workplace dispute. HR steps in. Suddenly the emails, the meeting notes, the contracts, they all matter. The loudest person in the room can't just spin their way out anymore. That is what Crockett did to Jordan. She pulled the argument out of the realm of noise and into the realm of record. And once it's on the record, the truth has a way of catching up. The bigger picture. Here is the ultimate lesson. Accountability isn't about who talks louder, it's about who leaves the strongest record of truth. And in that hearing room, Crockett built a record that can't be ignored. That's why this golden nugget matters so much for America. Because it shows us that even in a system where powerful voices dominate, there are still tools. Preparation, storytelling, persistence that can pin down the truth. Motivational closing. So if you've ever felt like the truth doesn't matter, if you've ever felt drowned out by someone louder, older, or more powerful, remember this. The truth might not win the noise of the moment, but the truth wins in the record. That's the golden nugget Jasmine Crockett gave us. And it's a reminder that accountability is possible if we are willing to speak up, stay prepared, and insist that the truth goes on the record, no matter how loud the opposition gets. We've taken a deep dive into one of the most powerful moments in recent congressional history. Jasmine Crockett standing her ground against Jim Jordan. And across this journey, we've learned so much more than just who won a debate. Quick recap. The hook. We started with the shock of watching a young congresswoman dismantle a seasoned political fighter live on national television. The context. We explored why these hearings matter, not just for Washington insiders, but for every American who cares about fairness, accountability, and truth. The problem. We saw how too often politics turns into noise and distraction instead of real accountability. The myth. We busted the idea that the loudest person always wins, showing how facts and strategy can flip the script. Solution 1. We learned the power of prepared accountability, walking into any argument armed with facts and composure. Solution 2. We uncovered the magic of emotional storytelling, anchoring facts in narratives that people can actually feel and remember. The golden nugget. We revealed that hearings aren't just political theatre. They re-legal records. Every word counts. Crockett wasn't just speaking for the cameras. She was creating a paper trail of truth, why this matters for you. Maybe you are not a lawmaker. Maybe you will never sit across from a Jim Jordan. But here's the thing. The lessons apply to all of us. In your workplace, you can use prepared accountability to stand strong against unfair criticism. In your relationships, you can use emotional storytelling to connect more deeply and resolve conflicts. In your community, you can remember the golden nugget. Once the truth is documented, it becomes powerful. This isn't just about politics. It's about life. It's about being heard, respected, and making sure your voice leaves a lasting impact. Motivational closing line. Here's the bottom line. The loudest person doesn't win. The most prepared, the most authentic, and the most truthful person does. That is what Jasmine Crockett reminded us, and that's what you can take into your own life, whether you are fighting for fairness at work, justice in your community, or simply respect at home. Call to action now. I want to hear from you. What do you think about Jasmine Crockett's exchange with Jim Jordan? Do you think more lawmakers should use her blend of facts, storytelling, and how can you use these strategies in your own life? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because your voice matters. And if this breakdown gave you new insight, don't forget to like this video to help more people discover it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive. Share it with a friend who needs to see how accountability really works. Because at the end of the day, democracy isn't a spectator sport. It is something we all participate in, and every voice counts.